Okay, the biggest problem affecting most organisations today, and we keep reading about it every day, there seems to be a new hack every day, and that's a threat to our infrastructure. But what is a threat? There are a lot of terms being bandied around, the so-called advanced persistent threat. In other words, the difficult new threat that typically is targeting a specific organisation. The most famous one in the last couple of years, of course, has to be Stuxnet. But there are other challenges affecting organisations: malware, botnet, sheer stupidity. The number of times organisations go through that education process with their staff and advise what you should and should not do when you're online. And of course, people break the rules. But then, of course, there's the accidental break, and then there's the malicious break of the rules. For example, organisations make it quite clear that employees should not be bringing their own devices into work because the organisation lacks the technology available to ensure that that endpoint is secure. And that's a challenge I've come across personally quite a bit in the last few years. But luckily, working with Cisco and using StealthWatch together with Cisco's Identity Services Engine, the ability for an organisation to have that effectively uncontrolled endpoint join the network in a controlled way helps to mitigate that. So the Identity Services Engine is for me, one of those great ideas that Cisco have brought to the market. But if we step back a little further, security has evolved, network security has evolved over the years, and if we actually looked back at how we've secured infrastructure, how network and host security has evolved, would we do things today in a different way if we started with a clean sheet of paper? One thing that we have to assume today is that attackers have already got through those network defenses. In fact, in Cisco's latest security report, looking at a sample of 30 of the world's largest multinationals, 96% of those organizations had communication to known hijacked servers. And around 92% of those organizations were transmitting traffic to web pages without content. That's a really good indicator of malicious activity. So if we were going to do things differently, if we were going to avoid the challenges, for example, at Neiman Marcus, the story came out on Friday that they'd had 60,000 events tell them they were being compromised, but it looks like those events were lost in the noise being made of the rest of their infrastructure. Would we do things different? So this is a new security model that Cisco have really developed that talks about the attack continuum. Essentially, there's this constant review of what is happening in the infrastructure. We have to take a more holistic view. Visibility is key. And what we mean by visibility is understanding every host-to-host communication, both within our network, across and through our networks, out to the public internet, out to trusted third parties. So we need to understand what it is we're defending. What devices do we have? What operating systems are in use? What applications are our user base accessing? And also, who is accessing the network? So we need to have access controls in place. We need to be able to enforce policy and block applications and also have real control over access to the assets within our infrastructure. But that's just a small part of what we need to be able to do. This might reduce the the overall surface area of the attack, so the open points that somebody could take advantage of, but there's still going to be holes there that the person with malicious intent may be able to find. And the other thing, of course, is that any gap you can use as a lever. Once you're in, you can either take advantage of that gap and push resources through it and further exploit the infrastructure. And that's something that we see at Lancope on a regular basis. It takes one port to be exposed. The attacker comes in and then starts effectively running riot around the infrastructure. So during the attack, we must be able to detect any threat, any potential malicious activity. It's only when we can detect that malicious activity and we know about it that we can block and defend our infrastructure. But we also have to accept that we cannot build a perfect defense. I'm a student of history and living in Europe. During the Middle Ages, we built bigger and better castles to keep the attackers out, but the attackers always found new ways to defeat the enormous defences we were building. The same is true today in IP infrastructures. Invariably, attackers will be successful, and we have to accept that. An organization needs to be able to determine the scope of the damage, contain it, remediate it, and bring the business back to normal as quickly as possible. We read about all of these attacks across those big brand names. If we're working inside security in those big brand names, not only are we defending the network from those threats, we're also defending our brand. So today's landscape is full of advanced malware, the so-called zero-day attacks. And what we're finding is that single solutions do not work. But what we have to do is deploy a really well-integrated tool set that doesn't actually add to the complexity of the problem. So we have simple streams of intelligence coming out of our organization, coming out of our networks into our organization so that we can understand exactly what is happening in the infrastructure. So I'm sure everybody is aware of the technologies that are available to us. We've got, obviously, visibility technologies, we've got control technologies, we have host-based technologies, we have perimeter technologies, we have SIM tools, which I believe is one of the most important assets. But the SIM itself is only going to be as useful as the intelligence coming in. So we need to ensure that the intelligence coming in has value. It's not just a simple log from a server. It's intelligence from our antivirus servers that are saying which hosts are infected. It's intelligence from our firewalls to understand where connections are being dropped. And from behavioral analysis solutions like StealthWatch, understanding where the anomalous traffic is happening within the infrastructure. So the goal of this model is to bring innovative technologies, products and solutions that cover the entire attack continuum. We need to understand that these technologies operate not just at one point in time, but also have this continuous capability to monitor and defend, and can also help us automate steps in that defense process so that we're not seeing 60,000 events that we ignore. We're receiving actionable intelligence, a single piece of intelligence that helps us understand where we're exposed to those threats. So where does StealthWatch fit? Well, StealthWatch fits really in the before phase, and it's not really shown here, is actually understanding what is happening, having visibility across the infrastructure. when we're seeing attacks, StealthWatch is able to detect and also provide long-term storage of the events that have happened in the infrastructure so that we can do that post-event, that post-game analysis. So before StealthWatch is determining what traffic, endpoints and services are on the infrastructure, understanding all of the host-to-host communication inside the network, building that baseline of normal behavior, and helping to classify what in the infrastructure is being detected. Now this is where I'm hoping to hopefully dispel some of the myths and confusion around how StealthWatch and products from Sourcefire fit together. I'm sure everybody is aware Sourcefire is now part of Cisco, and from Cisco's next financial year, all of the Sourcefire products will be on the Cisco GPL alongside StealthWatch, which is already on the Cisco price list. So if we look at the continuum, look at each phase of the continuum, looking at before. So we're providing visibility of all host-to-host communication. But Sourcefire is doing a similar thing. The difference between the two is in terms of the number of hosts being monitored is scalability. A single Sourcefire deployment will map and give us a profile of around 300,000 hosts. StealthWatch scales up to around 25 million hosts. Leveraging technologies such as NBAR and the StealthWatch flow sensor, StealthWatch can identify around 1,000 applications, whereas the strength of Sourcefire is the ability to identify around double that amount. Sourcefire's strength is also in identifying operating systems. This is something that flow data typically is not very good at. It's not really understanding deep enough in the conversation to understand the OS. However, what we're able to do is understand all of that host-to-host communication within the infrastructure to provide extra intelligence around the changes in behavior of each host in terms of the traffic volumes, the number of connections a host is serving, where a client is attempting to connect to, what applications it's actually running. And together, both are giving us real awareness of what is happening within our infrastructure. StealthWatch was once referred to me as a network-wide IDS. Well, Sourcefire is definitely in that space, and it's certainly a key component in any organization looking to bolster its intrusion prevention capability, whereas StealthWatch is a technology that helps identify any form of intrusion across the entire infrastructure. So looking at what happens during an attack, with both technologies are probe-based. The difference between the two technologies is that Sourcefire uses dedicated network probes and host agents. So we have to ensure that they are deployed in the network. StealthWatch is leveraging primarily the network infrastructure itself. And whilst aside to Cisco, StealthWatch is a multi-vendor technology. We can take intelligence from Cisco, from HP, from Juniper, from Huawei, from Brocade, from Bluecoat, and effectively turn the entire infrastructure as it exists today into a network of sensors. Now, detection is different between the two, and my firm belief with over 25 years of experience in this area is that you do need both. You need the strength of rules engines like Snort, and that's also evolving. The latest announcements from Cisco around OpenApp, having a really powerful rules-based engine that lets me protect an infrastructure from what I know. StealthWatch is doing what it was designed to do 13 years ago. that's filling the gaps between those rule-based policies. It's allowing us to detect the unknown changes in behavior. By building this host model and using statistical modeling, we can detect changes in behavior that are key indicators to new and unknown threats. Being able to detect attacks that are not necessarily violating policy. For example, significant uploads of data that may be an indication of data loss. Significant downloads of data are going to be detected in StealthWatch 6.5, which is due for release next month. We call it data hoarding, that preparatory behavior before a mass exfiltration of data from an infrastructure. And also the low and slow attacks where a host is only pinging maybe once or twice a day to understand where the potential weaknesses are within the organization's infrastructure. Well, Sourcefire is looking deeper. Where its probes are deployed, it's looking much deeper into the packet. It's using sandboxing techniques to identify known bad file activity. So here we have two technologies, both part of the same product portfolio, that are actively working together, and we can then leverage the intelligence from both of these technologies via the SIM so that we can understand the full attack continuum affecting our infrastructure. But if we have had an attack, what we're getting is good forensic data from both technologies. From Sourcefire, we're seeing this file interaction history, understanding what has happened in terms of those known bad files. This allows us to limit the proliferation of data in that format across the infrastructure. Now, if we do have unknown malware affecting our infrastructure, StealthWatch is excellent at detecting that spread without any reference to any form of known signature to complement what Sourcefire is doing by detecting the unknown. We've also got this great rich data set so that we can look back in time and see what has happened before this attack was identified. So I've got a couple of product comparison slides here, as well as making the recording available. I will try and make this deck available to everybody as a PDF so that everyone can see the comparison. But if you're using screen capture software, this is definitely a slide that you want to take and the one that follows it. So here we're looking at the two technologies side by side. So we're both creating metadata from the traffic crossing the network. Now this is good. The storage vendors don't like it because it means our databases are relatively small, which makes data easier to mine, which means the products are more responsive. So we're not capturing every single packet crossing the infrastructure. In terms of storage of data, the difference between FireSIGHT and StealthWatch is that typically we've got around 500 million events and flow summaries, so effectively records of conversations within FireSIGHT. With StealthWatch, a typical deployment, whilst we guarantee our customers a minimum of 30 days in every deployment we roll out, we know we have deployments out there that have got 1,000 days and more of flow. One of our banking customers, they have been able to keep every single flow record their flow collectors have created since the solution was switched on. Again, in terms of the number, the sheer volume of events, there is a difference between the two technologies. FireSIGHT is processing around 10,000 events per second based on the appliance model. And the same with StealthWatch, based on the appliance model, we're processing up to 120,000 records per second. In terms of scalability, I truly believe that in terms of visibility of an infrastructure, StealthWatch is providing much greater visibility because we've got the ability to parallel flow collectors out. And again, in terms of scalability, the sources of information, the difference between the two technologies is that with a single defense center, FireSIGHT supports around 100 sensors in a single database. With StealthWatch, we've got up to 50,000 sources of information, so that's the routers, switches and firewalls in the infrastructure, and that data set is spread across 25 distributed databases, all being mined by a single management console that's retaining long-term statistics created from those flow collectors. Now to compare FireAmp with StealthWatch. Well, FireAmp today is a host-based solution. Those of you at Cisco Live in Milan a few weeks ago will have learned that the goal is to have FireAmp embedded in certainly within the infrastructure. FireAmp is effectively analyzing the contents of files. This is where StealthWatch differs. We're looking at host-to-host communication. So if you're looking at a detection model where you want to have the maximum amount of intelligence, you want to have both methods of detection. Whilst file analysis isn't 100% effective, what we found in the 13 years we've been deploying StealthWatch within an organization, we complement that approach by detecting malware by looking at host-to-host communication. Both technologies have a form of quarantine. So with FireAmp, the files themselves are quarantined so that they're not further distributed across an infrastructure. With StealthWatch, we're able to take an active role in the infrastructure, and this is becoming increasingly important for organizations. We can either automatically or under an operator's control change firewall rules, send mitigating actions to a perimeter or data center IPS, send actions to a traffic scrubber to help protect an organization from denial of service behaviors. And also, what we'll be doing with a future release of the Identity Services Engine is a mitigation from StealthWatch back into ISE to quarantine hosts. But there are other differences, and I'll leave everybody to, everyone's probably reading ahead of me, but I believe that these two technologies should be deployed side by side within an infrastructure. Moving FireAmp from the perimeter into the infrastructure allows an organization to ensure it's secure. The challenge today is that the endpoint has to be protected. All too often, when we're deploying StealthWatch in an organization, we're helping to clean up infections that are continuously propagating because the organization has not protected the root of the infection. It's that unknown host that's unprotected that's continually reinfecting the organization's infrastructure. So Cisco's security portfolio now has the industry's most comprehensive advanced threat protection covering the entire attack continuum. Working together, we're able to provide protection throughout that attack cycle, before, during, and after. Now, unfortunately, I am no expert in all of these technologies. However, what I have learned in the last 25 years is that there is no one single magic bullet that's going to solve all network security problems. We do need to consider the threat landscape that as it evolves and ensure we have a portfolio of security solutions in our infrastructure to ensure that we have the most proactive and most up-to-date mechanisms for understanding what is happening in our network, how those changes in behavior give us an understanding of the evolving threats that are potentially impacting our infrastructure. And when we have been hit, we have a suite of tools available that allow us to understand exactly what happened and give us the intelligence we need to ensure those back doors are continued to be closed. So in summary, we live in a world where security breaches will happen. Prevention alone is not enough, because we can only really prevent what we know. Organisations must move beyond the thought of just protecting to how to become resilient in the face of never-ending, constantly changing threats. The old axiom, the only constant is change, is very true when we're looking at the threats impacting IP networks. So to do this, the security model must change. Our model must be threat-centric. That means we focus on the threats themselves rather than just policy and controls, but they are still important. And we must provide the broadest possible coverage across all attack vectors. Our security model must be enabled using world-class research together with open source capabilities for enhanced security intelligence. Nothing beats crowdsourcing. The world of threats is crowdsourced. What we need to be is the bigger crowd, the more reactive crowd, to be able to respond more quickly to evolving threats. So we must be able to rapidly adjust and learn from new attack methods and continually feed that intelligence back into our infrastructure. We have to have this adaptive methodology when it comes to security. Now, we're already talking about the Internet of Everything. 18 months ago, being the forever British skeptic, I'm thinking this is just a marketing term. But increasingly, I'm learning that we are seeing IP-enabled devices causing problems that we never really thought about. Just the other day, I was reading a story how a spam server was traced back to an IP agent running on a refrigerator in somebody's kitchen. So this strategy has to give us much deeper visibility. We must continuously adapt and allow organizations to act smarter and more quickly, both before and during an attack, and when we have had an attack, be able to understand exactly what's happened. Okay, well, I hope everybody found that session useful. I'm going to stop the recording now.